never heard anybody else say, which is one of the first things, if you take that from the workshop, kind of, it's one of the more important things. When she was going,
can you just pick it back up because I had to stop recording? I've got an 11-minute file, remember? 11 minutes. Right, so it cuts out. So if you can pick it up from what that first shaman said.
Okay. So before the first ceremony, her name was Yatra for Brazil. She's quite a witch. And she was saying, and by the way, you can die. And if you die, have the experience. It's a good experience. Really have the experience. You will come back. You will be here in the morning. No problem. But don't fight it. Have the experience. And I have never heard anybody else say that, which is very, very bizarre because ayahuasca, as well as DMT, is the active ingredient, which also gets released in the brain when you get born and when you die. But ayahuasca is famous that that's in a way one of the privileges you can have, that you can cross through the death gates. And you can have the experience of what it's like to die, not even necessarily physically. I mean, in my experience, it was almost the different systems of who Meriana was in this little avatar were shutting down. It was extremely natural process. You really know how to do it. You're programmed to really know how to do it. And it actually turned into one of the more beautiful experiences ever. On the other hand, I know so many people who are not told that you can die or you can have the experience of death and who get terrified and spend half of their session fighting it and fighting for survival because they're so afraid they're gonna die versus going, yeah, bingo, cosmic lottery, I'm gonna have the death experience. And very, very few shamans ever mention that, which I think is kind of almost painful because it's almost like not taking the fear away from something that can be an amazing growth experience and letting people who are reaching that amazing transformation point struggle in fear and fight for their lives, so to say, instead of really being able to relax, take notes of the scenery, have the experience. And in my personal experience, after this little Meriana avatar died, it was amazing to be connected to the rest of me, which had very little of who the big Meriana was, and it was a very interdimensional species kind of entity. It was the depth of who I am, with this being like one little avatar in a pretty primitive video game. It felt like if there was me, this was me playing Pac-Man. Pac-Man is not particularly hard video game, you know what I mean? And this was like the little avatar I was using in Pac-Man, and most of me, so to say, it was like cutting off your fingernail and going, oh, or like the tip of your fingernail and going, oh, that died. Too bad. So it was a little bit, it was so interesting how little of that being that I was could die. So most of it was not, very little of it had death in its program. So it was the kind of a thing you cannot be touched. I mean, a lot of it, we're going to speak also a little bit later about some of those downloads again, especially in ayahuasca, about the nature of time and space, and it's also spoken about in many spiritual books and many metaphysical books about time-space being only some of the realities that exists, apart from also being simultaneous, but that also there are a lot of realities outside of time-space. And it was interesting to discover that most of me was living outside of time-space. Living is an interesting thing, but existing outside of time-space. So if you guys have that experience too, I want to hear. Like, come to me after the after the ceremony to let me know how that goes. Yeah, because it's a beautiful thing if you can relax and take notes and smell the flowers, so to say, and take in the scenery and really let yourself have the process and then see how beautiful it can be on the other side. What were you saying?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what you were touching on that your shaman had said. I think probably the single most important thing to remember about taking any psychedelic, you know, intention is important when you're talking about that, but probably the most important thing for having a beneficial psychedelic experience is learning how to surrender. That has to be the primary thing, to surrendering to the experience. And it's the main reason people have trouble with experiences is because they fight it, they resist it in some way. And people who have rigid egos, especially, you know, I find that women in general tend to take the psychedelic experiences easier than men. And I thought about that a lot, and I've wondered. And I think it's partially because Women in childbirth are taught to surrender. You have to surrender to a process larger to you than yourself. And that's really what doing a psychedelic is about surrendering to something that's much bigger than yourself. Meriana was saying, you feel like you're just this fingernail on top of this much, much greater being that's your true self. And these individual life characters that believe in are just like, animated Pac-Man characters in some kind of computer game.
On that point, I just wanted to add that I've been having an ongoing conversation with an ex-girlfriend about how much surrender it takes for a woman to make love with a man because of how I never really understood how vulnerable we have to be to have this huge human on top of you, and it's quite it can be an experience that you need to get used to, allowing a certain level of vulnerability and for not just childbirth but making love, and there's lots of experiences that women go through that men don't have to go through.
Exactly. And there's lots of experiences that men go through that to sort of culturally force them into positions of being in control, not letting go of control, trying to control the experience, and that is usually the wrong thing to do. It's very important to set intention about what you want from an experience, but the first thing to remember is surrender. Now, but that's just the basis. Remember the surrender at the beginning, but then what you actually want to move into is moving into interacting with the experience. You want to be able to ask questions. You want to be able to converse with the entities or the intelligence. As far as my experiences have shown me, every plant and every psychedelic drug is a being. It's an intelligence. It's an entity. And they all have different personalities, and you develop relationships with them. So the first thing to remember is to surrender and not fight it, and to let go. And the next thing is then to start to interact and to learn how to actually communicate with these entities.
Okay. I would not say don't ever control it, but also some of the tools you're going to be using. In a way, it is partially for controlling the experience, but in an interacting kind of way, because you can, when I interact with you, for example, I can interact with your angelic nature, or I can interact with the bitch hidden inside of you. You know what I mean? I can interact with the part that was going to come and help me, or I can interact with the part that's going to throw me in the street and doesn't care. And kind of what I interact with, I'm going to get more of. It's a little bit like energy follows intention. And you can, so I have a lot of data from my own experience, but also I have worked with a lot of clients who are working with ayahuasca. So let's make it today more about ayahuasca, though as I say, it's the same tools that you can use in mushrooms, you can use in other medicines, and you can use a lot of those tools just when you're having a hard day, when you're having a beautiful day and you want to anchor it, so you can use it as a resource in a different time when you're making love, or so don't be constricted to using those tools only in the ayahuasca experience. But also with a lot of my clients and their experience with ayahuasca and how they work with different issues. And we work a lot on how to give them tools, how to set intentions, and we're going to be speaking about setting in a minute. But again, resistance is an interesting one, so I'm just going to call it right now, because that was also coming up recently with someone. Resistance has to do with not trusting that what's coming to you is either the right thing, that is the right lessons, or that you can handle it. And there are also ways to amplify the resistance. They're going, oh my God, I cannot deal with this. Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to. This is going to be so much. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to handle this. I can't handle this. This is a beautiful way to create resistance. Because also, in some of the other tools we're going to talk, the conscious is a dog and it's listening to you. And if it's hearing, I can't handle this, it's looking for ways, how is it that I can't handle that? Survival. So it's also, it's easy sometimes to go into fear and that is also a form of controlling the experience. But freaking out, you're still controlling your experience, but you're just making it so hard on yourself. And I had a different client who used to actually, who tended to use some of the ways he was interacting with the ayahuasca were very different from the tools I was teaching, and was kind of using the questions to not use that we're going to get to in a little bit. And at some point I remember him going, ayahuasca, why am I having such a hard time? And she goes, because you're not helping. So today we're going to be giving you a lot of tools of how to be helping, because she's a beautiful spirit. She's one of the wisest and most motherly kind of spirits. In some ways, she's a beautiful ally. I mean, she can do spankings, but she's usually, you can feel the wisdom and almost the good intention of that particular spirit. Like with mushrooms, it's more like the mischievous, well, I'm gonna fuck with you, but I'm gonna have a sense of humor. And ayahuasca is much more come, we gotta travel. So should we start?
Yeah, I just want to say a little about set and setting before. I'd like everybody to go and introduce themselves, but I just wanted to add to what Meriana said about set and setting, because I think it is very important in planning a psychedelic session. This is a concept that was developed by Timothy Leary, a psychologist at Harvard University back in the early 60s when he started the psilocybin research project. And if you look at the scientific literature from the 50s, and you see there were hundreds, there were over 700 studies done with LSD and psilocybin between, say, 1950 and 1972, with like amazingly positive results, curing alcoholism, curing all kinds of psychological disorders that were untreatable, obsessive compulsive disorder, really amazing results, especially more than anything else, helping people with the anxiety that comes around death, helping people to accept death, because as Meriana was saying, it actually gives you a preview of what to expect after death. So psychedelics have been tremendously helpful in this respect. So the scientific research in this area, even though they were getting many benefits and all these things, then there was this other side of the research that was showing that psychedelics was basically mimicking psychosis, that it was making people go crazy, that it was a model for insanity. Okay? And if you look at all the scientific literature, it seems like they're talking about different drugs. It doesn't even seem like they're talking about the same drug. And the reason for this is because what's most important to doing a psychedelic, any psychedelic, from ayahuasca to mushrooms to cannabis, is set and setting. Okay? Set means, your setting is the environment. Right now, the place where we're sitting, and you want your environment to be as aesthetically pleasing